If you're reading this, Robert, it means I'm gone. And it also means I'm finally ready to tell you the truth I've hidden for the last 30 years. Those were the first words that made Robert Anderson, a 71-year-old retired architect from Seattle, Washington, freeze in place. The letter rested in his trembling hands. He recognized the handwriting instantly. It belonged to his wife, Evelyn Anderson, who had passed away peacefully 6 months earlier after a long battle with heart disease. For nearly 50 years, Robert believed they had shared everything. No secrets, no lies, no regrets. Now, with a single sentence, everything he believed about his marriage began to crumble. The letter had been hidden inside a small cedar box tucked behind a loose wooden panel in Evelyn's old closet. Robert had only discovered it while preparing the house for sale. The box contained one brass key, the sealed envelope, and a handwritten note. "Please don't open this until you're truly ready." For weeks, Robert ignored it, but loneliness has a strange way of making people brave. On a rainy October afternoon, with thunder rolling across Puget Sound, he finally broke the seal. His heart pounded as he continued reading. "Robert, everything I ever told you about loving you was true. But before I met you, something happened that changed another person's life forever. I thought burying the truth would protect us both. Instead, I carried its weight every single day." Robert lowered the letter. "What truth?" he whispered to the empty house. His eyes returned to the page. "If you want answers, go to Harbor Storage in Bar Harbor, Maine, locker 214. Use the key inside the box. Everything begins there." That was it. No explanation, no names, just a destination. Robert stared out the window. Rain streamed down the glass while memories flooded his mind. Meeting Evelyn in Chicago. Their tiny first apartment. The nights they stayed up worrying about bills. The day their daughter Sarah was born. The family vacations. Their grandchildren. Every memory suddenly felt different, as if an invisible piece had always been missing. The next morning, Sarah and her younger brother Michael came over for breakfast. Robert silently handed them the letter. Sarah read it twice before looking up. "Dad, Mom wouldn't have written this unless it was important." Michael frowned. "Or maybe she was confused near the end. You know how sick she was." Robert shook his head immediately. "No, your mother knew exactly what she was doing." He folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. "I'm going to Maine." "Dad, that's almost 3,000 miles away," Sarah said. "I know. You shouldn't make that drive alone." "I have to." There was something in his voice neither of them had heard before. Not grief. Determination. 2 days later, Robert packed his old Ford F-150 and began the cross-country drive. Hour after hour, interstate highways stretched endlessly before him. The further he drove from Seattle, the more questions filled his mind. Who had Evelyn been protecting? Why wait after her death? And what could possibly be hidden in a storage locker for 30 years? 4 days later, Robert arrived in the quiet coastal town of Bar Harbor, Maine. Cold Atlantic wind swept through the harbor as fishing boats rocked gently in the water. Harbor Storage sat near the docks, looking untouched by time. Inside the dim building, rows of metal lockers disappeared into the shadows. He found locker 214. With trembling hands, he inserted the brass key. The lock clicked. The door slowly creaked open. Inside sat an old leather suitcase, a stack of photographs, a worn leather journal, and a thick envelope with his name written across the front. But before Robert could reach for it, he heard slow footsteps echoing behind him. He turned around. An elderly man in a dark navy coat stood silently at the end of the aisle. The stranger looked directly into Robert's eyes and quietly said, "I've been waiting 30 years for you to open that locker." Robert's heart raced as he stared at the stranger standing at the end of the storage aisle. The elderly man took a slow step forward, removing his weathered cap. "My name is Jacob Harbour. Evelyn asked me to wait for this day. I just didn't think it would take 30 years." Robert tightened his grip on the envelope. "You knew my wife?" Jacob nodded. "I knew a part of her life that she never wanted you to carry." Silence filled the room. Outside, waves crashed against the harbor while the old building creaked in the cold Atlantic wind. Jacob pointed toward the leather suitcase. "Open it." Robert slowly knelt and unlatched the worn case. Inside were dozens of neatly organized photographs, newspaper clippings, medical records, and a leather-bound journal. The first photograph stole his breath. It showed a much younger Evelyn smiling with her arm around a little girl with bright blue eyes and curly blonde hair. The girl couldn't have been older than 8. Robert had never seen her before. "Who is she?" he asked. Jacob looked at the photograph for a long moment. "Her name is Emma Reed." Robert frowned. "Evelyn never mentioned an Emma." "That's because she believed telling you would destroy the life the two of you built together." Robert's chest tightened. He opened the journal. The first page was written in Evelyn's familiar handwriting. If Robert is reading this, then he deserves the truth. He continued. 32 years earlier, before she met Robert, Evelyn volunteered at a children's recovery center outside Boston, Massachusetts, after a devastating highway accident. Among the survivors was an 8-year-old girl named Emma. Emma had lost both of her parents that same night. She had no close family willing to care for her. For nearly a year, Evelyn visited Emma almost every day. She helped her heal, she read bedtime stories, she attended school meetings. She became the closest thing Emma had to a mother. Robert turned another page. Then everything changed. A wealthy, distant relative suddenly appeared and won legal custody of Emma. On paper, it looked like a loving family reunion. In reality, they only wanted control of the trust fund Emma's parents had left behind. Evelyn fought the decision. She hired a lawyer, she even testified in court, but she lost. Emma disappeared from her life almost overnight. Robert swallowed hard. Why didn't she keep looking? Jacob answered quietly. She did. He reached into the suitcase and pulled out a thick stack of unopened letters. There are over 100 letters here. Robert stared in disbelief. Every birthday? Every Christmas? Every graduation? Evelyn wrote to Emma, but she never mailed them. Robert's voice cracked. Why? Because every lawyer she consulted warned her the family would use those letters to accuse her of harassment. They threatened lawsuits and restraining orders. Jacob paused. So she loved Emma from a distance. Robert wiped tears from his eyes. The journal wasn't finished. On the final pages, Evelyn revealed something Robert had never imagined. For nearly 30 years, she had secretly created a college scholarship under another name. She quietly paid for Emma's education. When Emma's husband lost his job years later, anonymous financial assistance arrived. When Emma's young son needed emergency surgery, the hospital bill was mysteriously paid in full. Emma never knew where the help came from. She simply believed that someone in the world was watching over her. Robert closed the journal. His hands were shaking. His wife hadn't lived a double life. She had lived a life of quiet sacrifice. Then Jacob handed him the envelope with his name written across it. Inside was one final letter. Robert, if you've come this far, there's one last thing I need you to do. Please find Emma. Don't tell her I abandoned her. Tell her I loved her every single day of my life. A recent address was paperclipped to the letter. Emma Reed, Denver, Colorado. Robert folded the paper carefully. I'm leaving tomorrow. Jacob gave a slow smile. I hoped you would. As Robert picked up the suitcase, Jacob stopped him one last time. There's something else you should know.
Robert turned. Jacob's expression became unusually serious. Emma has spent her entire adult life searching for the woman who saved her as a little girl. He hesitated before adding, and last month she finally found a clue. Robert's eyes widened. What clue? Jacob looked directly at him. Her wife's name. For the first time in 30 years, the truth was no longer buried. It was already racing towards him.
Robert barely slept that night. As dawn broke over Bar Harbor, he loaded Evelyn's suitcase into his truck and began the long drive to Denver, Colorado. Every mile felt heavier than the last. For the first time since Evelyn's death, he realized she hadn't hidden the truth because she didn't trust him. She had hidden it because she spent 30 years protecting a little girl she could never stop loving. 2 days later, Robert stood outside a modest brick home in a quiet Denver neighborhood. His hands trembled as he knocked on the front door. A woman in her early 40s opened it. Her bright blue eyes looked painfully familiar. For a moment, Robert saw Evelyn. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. "Are you Emma Reed?" She nodded cautiously. "Yes." "My name is Robert Anderson." She looked confused. "I was Evelyn Anderson's husband." Emma's face instantly changed. Her eyes filled with tears before Robert had even explained why he was there. "You knew Evelyn?" she whispered. Robert gently held out the leather journal and the final letter. "I think these belong to you." Emma invited him inside without another word. The house was warm and filled with family photographs. 2 children laughed in the backyard, while Emma's husband, Daniel, quietly greeted Robert before giving them privacy. Emma opened Evelyn's letter with shaking hands. As she read each line, tears rolled down her cheeks. "Emma, I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped praying for you. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone in your life, I celebrated you from a distance. I wasn't the mother you deserved, but loving you was one of the greatest gifts of my life." Emma covered her mouth and began to cry. "I spent my whole life believing she forgot me." Robert gently shook his head. "No." He opened the suitcase. One by one, he placed the birthday cards, Christmas letters, photographs, and keepsakes on the dining room table. There are more than 100 letters. Emma stared at the growing pile in disbelief. "She wrote all of these for me?" "Every single one." For the next several hours, neither of them spoke very much. They simply read. Each letter told the story of a woman who had quietly loved someone she could no longer reach. By sunset, the dining table was covered with decades of memories. Finally, Emma looked up. "I always wondered who paid for my college." Robert smiled through tears. "It was Evelyn." "The hospital bills when my son was sick." "Evelyn." "The anonymous scholarship." "Evelyn." Emma buried her face in her hands. "She was with me all along." A week later, Robert and Emma traveled together to Seattle. They stood side by side at Evelyn's grave beneath a tall maple tree. Emma placed a bouquet of white lilies beside the headstone. "I wish I could have thanked you," she whispered. Robert rested his hand gently on the stone. "I spent 50 years loving an incredible woman." He paused. "But today I realized I never truly understood how extraordinary she really was." The wind moved softly through the trees. For the first time in months, Robert felt peace instead of grief. Before returning home, Emma turned to him. "You know, my children have never had a grandfather." Robert smiled. "And I've been missing a family I never knew I had." From that day forward, holidays were no longer spent in separate states. Birthdays were celebrated together.
family dinners became a tradition. The letters that had once carried decades of silent love were carefully placed into a memory album so Emma's children would always know the woman who had watched over their family from afar. Months later, Robert received one final surprise. Inside Evelyn's attorney's files was a handwritten note she had prepared years before. "Robert, if this story ends the way I hope it does, don't spend the rest of your life mourning me. Spend it loving the family we found together." Robert folded the note, looked up at the evening sky, and smiled. Sometimes the greatest secrets are not hidden to deceive us. Sometimes they are hidden until love is finally strong enough to reveal them.